Hey folks, good evening. Welcome to another money space with me, Kalu Aja. Of course, in that space, we're talking money, the economy, and of course, finance. And we want to make those topics, easy for you to understand, easy for you to follow, so you can become a better investor and, of course, a better, taxpayer and all that. This week we are talking macroeconomics, but don't worry, we're going to make it really, really easy for you to follow and understand. I've got an economist in the house with me. His name is Dr. Wilson Erumabo. He's an economist, PhD. Congratulations, sir. And he's also in the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, but he's here on his personal capacity. And we're going to talk around the concepts of job creation, productivity, why do we hear GDP growing, but we don't have jobs being created? Or why do we have job creation in certain parts of Nigeria and not across the whole Nigeria? Why is that a problem? Why is banking and finance? We see banks everywhere, we see POS everywhere, but we don't see that job number or that unemployment figure. We don't see it really addressing critical consumption. Everybody has a job in the bank or in the POS and the financial sector, but it's not really reflecting the economy in terms of income that we're earning. So all those questions are what we're going to talk to the economist about today. So let me just have him come online, introduce himself, and then we can get going. Good day, sir. How are you, sir? Good morning. Welcome to the party.
Yeah, good evening, Kalu. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Wilson, like you said, and I work with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and I also teach at SOAS, University of London. I teach about development of Africa. And yeah, I do a lot of things as well with Faith Foundation and a couple of organizations, so it's a pleasure for me to be here.
Fantastic. So pleased to have you here as well. Let's just start with I saw the video from the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Just give us an onside. What's the Nigerian Economic Summit Group? What do you guys do? And what was your message this year to the government?
So what we do basically at the MESG is we do research, we do policy advocacy, and we try anywhere you see, anywhere that we're talking about development of Nigeria, we're always there. So the MESG is not a government organization or institution. It's not in any way funded by the government. But what we do, we're funded by the private sector, and also we have a couple of grants here and there. But what we do basically is to advance economic development as far as Nigeria is concerned. So in that process, we have members, institutional members like Shell, First Bank, some of the top companies in Nigeria, some of the big manufacturing firms. It's almost like they came together to form the NESG so that the NESG can advocate for better policies on their behalf instead of all of these companies going to the government and push for a better business environment. So they dedicate that responsibility to the NESG. So in that process, we get to do a lot of work with the government, work in meetings, trying to get government to deliver better policies, whether it's infrastructure, access to finance, job creation, whatever will make Nigeria grow. And we always say that we work in the national interest. And so whatever we do has to be backed by some research, evidence, and it has to be very non-partisan, so it's all about development of Nigeria.
Fantastic. So what was the key message this year? I did see the video. It was very, very short, very to the point. It was about job and job productivity. What was the key message you're trying to get across to the decision makers that were in attendance? I saw the Minister of Finance there and all.
Yes, so it was all about reforms and ensuring that not just reforms, but ensuring that reforms get to impact people, ensuring that we have consistency in policies, ensuring that we understand that if we, even as much as we want to have a stable macroeconomic environment, we want GDP growth effects to be stable, but we also need to realize there is a human side to development as well. That whatever we do on the macro side, we have to, in a way, carry the majority of Nigerians along. So development has to be felt in their pockets in a way. And so that my presentation was just an aspect of the summit that focused on job creation and productivity.
Yeah, I found this very, very moving, and I'm going to just share with the audience. So what I've done is that I've sort of done highlighted some slides, which the guys are going to just share as we speak. So, if you want to follow, just go to the Twitter feed. I think we've shared slide number 1. You just see it on my Twitter feed there. Slide number 1 is talking about the 4.5 million jobs. Doctor, you're basically saying that Nigeria, if we assume the 4% on the 4.3 unemployment level is correct, which I have issues with.
Yeah.
But if we assume that number is correct, you are saying Nigeria has got to create 4.5 million jobs every year just to maintain that 4.3. And again, it's good to go for some context. The 4.3 assumes that the person is working 1 hour a week. So that's not really an employment in my view. But even if we take that one person works 1 hour every week, we've got to create 4.5 million jobs just to maintain that 4.3% figure. Can you talk around that for us, please?
Yeah, so, Carlo, I think that is even a base case, that 4.5 million jobs, because, as you know, when the NBS released that unemployment data, many of us were not really, we have concerns, especially given where we're coming from. Initially, if you work below 19, 20 hours a week, you're classified as unemployed. But now, with the new methodology, the rates tend to drop from I think about 33.3% in 2020, and now we're doing 4% unemployment rate. And one of the things we also highlighted in that report is that anytime anybody quotes unemployment rate and you say it's 4% or 5%, you have to also quote figures like the share of workers that are in the informal economy, which is 92-93%. So you're saying if we have same unemployment rate as a country like, say, France, for instance, or Germany, or say the US, for instance, they don't have 90 or over 90% in informal employment. So I think as much as, even if we try to accept that 4.3% unemployment rate, it shouldn't be, we shouldn't look at it as a standalone figure. There are other indicators of labor markets that are even more important that we need to pay attention to. And so that 4.5 million jobs that we estimated that Nigeria has to create. So if you notice, there's an emphasis on formal jobs in that 4.55 million. So it's almost saying that how do we, in a way, reduce the share of people in the informal economy? So it's not just about jobs, but also creating better jobs in the economy. And so from now to 2030, we estimated 27 million jobs has to be created. And then that's where we got the 4.5 million jobs. And to deliver that, we estimated growth has to be within 7 to 10%, GDP growth. And more importantly, the sectors that drive growth, has to be, we're not just talking about growth led by oil or crude oil this time. It has to be broad-based.
We're going to come to that, Doc. So just to emphasize what you're saying, Nigerians are currently let's give Nigeria 4% or even 5% GDP growth. You are saying Nigeria's got to grow about, did you say 7-8%?
Yes, precisely, over 7%. And not just the numbers itself, but also the sectors that contribute to this growth. If you look at the Q2 GDP figures where we had 4.2% growth,
yes.
Oil contributed significantly. I think oil's growth was about 20%.
Yeah.
So it contributed significantly to that growth.
Okay.
Not necessarily saying that oil should not grow, but some other key sectors should grow at a much faster pace.
Gotcha. Okay. So again, just to calibrate, at the 4% unemployment rate, which is calculated saying a Nigerian works 1 hour a week. Even to hit that 1 hour a week, Nigeria has got to grow about 7% to meet that growth. Let's come to the second slide. Guys, share slide number 2. We're going to share slide number 2, Doc. I think it's going to be up there. So you can just follow for visuals. It's there for you to follow the visuals so you can understand what Doc is talking about. So we'll share slide number 2. Just go to my Twitter feed. It's going to be the latest slide shared there. You would see this is a slide talking about the percentage of wage earners in the private and the public sector in 2023. So what you've done, Doc, you've highlighted some states there, all the way from Lagos to Zamfara. And I like the way you've done the chart. You've done private sector versus public sector. And I know in this presentation you are talking about that job creation is in mostly state capitals. Then now you've gone now out of the state capitals to all 36 states. And you basically showed us how the jobs are being created. You can see Lagos has a lot of private sector jobs. Zamfara has a lot of public sector jobs. So 2 questions here. Let's start with, why is it a problem that jobs are created in state capitals? Let's start from there before we go into why this distribution is also an issue. Why is it a problem that each state jobs are created only in state capitals?
Well, first, that chart is from the NBS. So what I did was just do a screenshot from the NBS labor force survey reports that was released, I think, in 2024. So it's basically NBS data. And for me, it's worrying because if most of your jobs are created within a particular region in a state, within certain areas in a state, it just means that, economic activities is skewed and not so much activities or not so much important or productive activities, is happening outside a few areas. So that's why you see once you leave certain state capitals in Nigeria, once you are driving, it's almost like you are into no man's land. You see like bushes left, right, until you get to maybe like the next major town, which of course is most often less developed than the capital itself. And you see that happening across different states in Nigeria. And so the argument there is we have to expand the depth and breadth of the private sector. Even in some capitals, what you have mostly is just banks and just a few businesses, and then that's it. And so for us at the NES, we were saying if Nigeria must develop, we have to have, developed cities, urban cities that are growing, where you have businesses, where you have activities, it's well connected by rail, road, power supply, and all of those basic amenities. That's the only way we can really expand the breadth of the private sector. So it's very important that we pay attention to that figure that the NBS has released. That I think the second leg of which I don't know if it could be your next question.
Yeah, the second leg is why is it a problem if Lagos is creating private sector jobs? And you can see how the chart is sort of tending from private jobs to public jobs. Must the state create private jobs? If Zamfara is creating public jobs, is there a problem with that? Are all jobs equal?
Yeah, I think when people rely on government for too much, you always know you are vulnerable as far as the state is concerned. The reason why it doesn't feel like that, at the moment, is because oil prices are reasonably high, production is improving, subsidies gone, and then the states are getting more resources. So it's easy for them to pay salaries and co. But what happens when oil price gets to $40 or $30 per barrel? So that's why you start seeing that a lot of these states that have huge workers under the government coffers, they would struggle. And then we're talking about issues of whether a strike and in fact economic recession could happen. As we've seen in 2016. Part of why I think we're not in a full-blown recession, especially with the official definition where you have consecutive decline in GDP growth, is because I think government is doing well. But in 2016, when we had that recession, if you remember, government was hardly hit. So a lot of our economic activities, whether it's in terms of salaries, government spending, I think has a lot of weight on the economy, as it were. So in a way, I think that's maybe for now it looks good, but if anything happens to government, then some of those states will be in severe trouble and unable to pay salaries. But even beyond that, the sustainable growth and development happens when the private sector is expanding and creating jobs, and I mean better jobs. I mean the formal private sector. That's really when development happens, because people, we're talking about things like innovation, productivity, all of those things happen within the private sector. And so if they can accommodate more workers and expand and grow, it's even more sustainable than just relying on government.
Gotcha. I'm not sure if this is the NPS that you talked about, but I'm just positively surprised that Borno, Kaduna, Plateau have a huge number of private sector jobs when compared to public jobs. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but is it because they have fewer government jobs or they have a lot of private jobs? It's agriculture. Is a farmer counted here? Like we've got Borno, number 2 outside Lagos. After Lagos, it's Borno. So what's the methodology there?
So this is formal employment. This is wage earners. It doesn't include
farmers and all that. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So this covers wage earners, people that earn salary. Basically, I think it was one of the most simplest way the NBS could get who works for who is formal and informal. This is almost the basic way to calculate that.
Yeah,
I guess that.
Borno is number 2 outside Lagos. Borno is higher than Ogun, that is beside Lagos, that has all those private companies that are just bordering Lagos. It's higher than by Rivers, it's higher than Anambra, it's higher than the FCT. And after Borno is Kaduna. After Kaduna is Plateau. These are all higher than Ogun State, FCT, Anambra, Rivers, all these clusters where we have Lagos, Port Harcourt, Abuja, is always going. So I'm just surprised. I want to know how Borno can do this. More than, say, Ogun State, that is just bordering Lagos, that is literally Agbara Industrial Complex, things like that. That's just my query.
Well, for me, I think some surprises. When we saw these numbers, there were some surprises. That we couldn't necessarily explain from the NBS.
Gotcha.
But what we know is that in 40%, in at least 40% of the states. So if you check overall, you will see that at least 40% of wage earners in, I think, about 13 or so states in Nigeria are employed by the government, which, in a way suggests that huge reliance on public sector wages. But I'm not sure I have specific explanation for why Bono, shows on that.
Yeah. Well, just curious. All right, guys, again, guys, if you want to follow, you just follow my Twitter feed. We're going to share the number 3 post now, so that way you can have the visuals of what we're talking about. Once we're done, we're going to come up to Dr. Maso, get an overview of their recommendations around jobs and productivity. But this is just for us to get the numbers in, to give you guys that, the baseline, what the narrative of Nigeria is speaking to. So, Doctor, we're now at number 3. And number 3 is talking around the 5 fastest growing sectors in Nigeria, i.e. GDP. What sectors are contributing the most to GDP in Nigeria? But then you did a very, very smart thing here. You did their contribution to employment. So if we look at, for instance, finance, 26% GDP growth in any economy is red hot, 26%. But if you add up all the top 5, so you add up finance, water supply, ICT, which is the GSM we see all everywhere and all that, you add up electricity, you add up the art and entertainment, Davido, all these boys we see, right? All 5 of them, 1.5% share of employment. I mean, that's I'd look at this because I've done this post myself on X, and you're correct. If you take the total, just look at it this way: in any state capital, there's a bank, and there are 26 banks in Nigeria. There's mostly also insurance companies. There's also maybe stockbroking firms. They are all together that work in the finance sector. Then in any state capital, there are POS operators. There's GSM. There's MTN, Zain. All those guys, they are all there. All those folks you see in that state capital, in your local government area, if you add up all of them, combine them together, they are 1.5% of the unemployment number in Nigeria. That's an anemic number, Doc. What's going on here?
Well, what's happening is the sectors that are driving GDP growth, in Nigeria, and I'm speaking here in terms of real GDP, they don't really employ enough people or many people. And with finance, I don't think it's surprising, and finance usually, if you have very high productivity in finance, very high labor productivity in finance, such that, I mean, just think of an investment bank, for instance. These guys control, billions of funds or millions of funds, but but they employ very few people. It could just be like less than 10 employees. So for finance and a couple of other sectors, ICT and the likes, it's not even surprising, that their share of employment is very low. And so we did a mapping of sectors, and we tried to look at all of the sectors, all the 18 major sectors in Nigeria, or 18 or 19 major sectors in Nigeria, which one contributes more to employment and what's their level of productivity. So you'd find that many of these sectors that contribute higher to economic growth, their employment share is very few. The ones that contribute low to growth, employ the most people. So, I mean, agriculture, for instance, employs, almost 30% of the labor force, the workforce. If you look at the latest NBS numbers in 2023, trade is another sector. We're talking here about mostly retail and petty trading, so these sectors, and in agriculture, as you know, our agriculture is mostly subsistence in nature. So we're saying where the sectors that carry the load of workers have very low productivity, whilst the ones with very high productivity employ few people. And for us, it was a problem, and I even explored this in my PhD thesis even more, that there has to be some reallocation of labor, especially if you follow the arguments of the structuralist, I would tell people who write about structural transformation, that when economy develop, fewer people are employed in agriculture, more people are employed in industry, and then later you move to services. But in Nigeria, what we've seen is there's been some shifts. People are leaving agriculture, but they are moving towards trade, petty trade. I think now is POS, and so many of these very low informal activities. So that's the transition that is happening. So if you take agriculture and you take all of these non-tradable services like, petty trading, cleaning, security, and the likes, collectively, those sectors account for like 80% of Nigerian workers' workforce.
Wow.
So just a few sectors with high growth are employing few people. So it's a mismatch that I think, defines Nigeria's developmental challenge. And for us, what we've argued is if we must grow and develop, there has to be some reallocation of labor, and some sectors that employ fewer people, they have to be able to grow and expand their capacity to absorb more labor, and manufacturing sits well, within that conversation.
So just to follow up, number one, is this why we hear GDP growth, but then we look around, there are no jobs, there's no impact? Nigeria is going at 4%. Any economy going at 4% is doing very, very well because we are growing more than population growth. But is this why we don't see the impact? This is number one. Number two, is the government aware of this, that the growth is being driven by a very, very tiny sector that doesn't really add? It's just 1.5% to employment. If we don't have folks employed, folks can't consume. So is this why we hear high GDP but people are unemployed and we don't see that impact? And number two, is the government really aware of this?
Well, you're right. It's part of the reason why when you hear GDP growth, it doesn't really connect to the people, because normally there are so many research, and even in other countries, that anytime the economy or GDP grows by say XYZ%, the next thing you think about is jobs. You look at the job numbers, what's happening there, how we're growing, where are the jobs coming from, which sectors are driving the growth. But for us in Nigeria, it's very clear. If oil grew by 20% in Q2 2025 and plays a very significant role in overall GDP growth, obviously very few jobs will be created in that process. So that's why, in fact, if you look at the NESG's macroeconomic outlook for the last, would I say, 5 years, we've looked at this issue in detail, that the quality of growth also matters, not just the numbers. But in Nigeria, anytime you hear the last growth 4.2%, the people that are very quick to celebrate it is the government, rightfully so. But if you really want a serious analysis, is for you to look at the contribution of to growth of some of the key sectors, and also their capacity to absorb labor and employ people. Because some sectors, that they grow, they need more workers, to grow. For some, it's not the same. They perhaps need more finance and more capital to grow. So that mix between labor and capital is very important. Whether or not the government is aware, this was presented at the summit. The minister was there when I made that presentation. We had, governors, state governors, they were all there. So the hope is that we will, present these findings to them directly, one-on-one, have a conversation and see how they can, how we can begin to look at policies that will, balance these, find these, this picture that we're showing, that how can growth connect more to the people, how can growth create jobs, and how can we empower those sectors to expand and grow and create jobs in the process. I think the key central theme is just to raise productivity, for the economy.
Gotcha. All right, guys, just to recap, we're talking at Nigeria's macroeconomic picture with a focus on productivity and growth. I'm talking to Dr. Wilson. I have one more or two more slides to share. Of course, if you want to ask him a question, please request to speak or send a DM. Once we're done, I think I've done about 5 minutes, and then we'll allow you guys to then ask your questions. Doc, the back office guys have shared the fourth one. That is called Nigeria's sectoral productivity, i.e. the contributions, Nigerian sectoral productivity and employment nexus. It's a very, very smart chart you guys did here. So you've sort of created like a matrix. There's the stagnant giants, there's the efficiency champions, there's the elite sectors, and there's the peripheral sectors. So I think what I see here is that this is where you've brought in the agriculture, the trade, all the main contributors to Nigeria's GDP. You brought them in here, but you now allocated them into these 4 boxes. So could you explain to us who are the stagnant giants, who are the efficiency champions, who are the elite sectors, and who are the peripheral sectors? Then give us the story behind the nexus, so we just understand what's happening with agriculture. Because in every village there's a farmer, but every village doesn't have a banker. So what's actually going on here? Walk us through that.
So what's happening is we try to look at 2 key indicators. One is the share of employment of a particular sector, and the other is labor productivity of that sector. So what we have is trying to measure both and see how we can distribute sectors along those lines. So on the left, on the y-axis, you have the share of employment, and on the x-axis, you have labor productivity in Naira. So when we did this chart, we found that some sectors were at the far end, whether on the x-axis or on the right-axis. So like I mentioned earlier, agriculture and trade, very top, at top left, which shows that they employ a significant share of the workforce. But if you look at their levels of productivity, it's so low that in fact they're almost close to the axis itself. So they have some of the lowest production, and typically so, because agriculture in most countries normally has the lowest levels of productivity, and particularly countries that are developing significantly. And it's not to say that agriculture is not important or that food is not necessary. Of course, you need food in any economy. So what the message there is just that you almost like have a case where majority at the early stages of development, majority of workers are in that sector. People are making their own food. There's a lot of, subsistence farming going on, almost what we have in Nigeria. And so the moment workers start leaving agriculture and moving in large numbers to other sectors, in fact, what happens is that the sector's productivity starts to increase. And so I know we are very emotional when we talk about agriculture, and when somebody makes an argument that the share of agriculture in Nigeria is too high, because I think at 30% is too high. I think agriculture should be maybe somewhere around 15% or even lower, maybe 10% of GDP of GDP and employment. And in fact, what I am arguing is that for agriculture to move from 30% to 15%, what I'm saying is agriculture's productivity has to increase significantly. It means that you will have fewer workers, but you have more output. A fewer share of workers, not fewer workers, because the number of workers can increase, but the share should reduce. So you just think of it, the simplest way to think of it is, instead of having 10 people using hoes and cutlasses to clear a field, just get a tractor and 1 or 2 persons, and that job will be done, and you can clear hectares of land with just 2 labor and 1 machinery. Your productivity would increase significantly. So I think that's the message, that even if you want to industrialize a country, say like Nigeria, you want to expand your manufacturing sector, there is no way 10 people can be clearing just 1 field, and you need agriculture to be productive. So it's almost like think of it like smart agriculture, where all of the machines are deployed. You're able to increase yield significantly without necessarily having too many workers. So the question then becomes, where will the excess labor move to? And that's the whole argument of structural transformation, that the more your industrial sector begins to expand, just think of a Dangote refinery or say a flour mills, expanding their plants all over the country. They employ more people, and that's, in fact, they even draw the excess labor from agriculture into the factory, because it's so much easier for you to transition from working in agriculture to working in a factory than working in agriculture to moving into tech or something. So we're saying that old argument of agricultural manufacturing and co is still very important for a country like Nigeria. And so there are other sectors you would see they have very much higher productivity but lower shares of employment. I think mining, I don't think we need to explain that, because crude oil, for instance, after ICT, crude oil has a very high labor productivity. You don't need too many workers in the sector, but it's one of the sectors that drives economic growth, the government revenue, and the likes. Same with finance, professional services, real estate, and a few other sectors. So with the argument about peripheral sectors, it's just a way of us to try to place sectors in a way that...
You put everybody there. Everybody's there.
Yes, exactly. And say, look, if we must grow, we don't need too many stagnant giants. What we should aim at is efficiency champions and elite sectors. It will be nice for us to have most of our sectors where labor productivity is really high. I think that's the emphasis. That's why it's on the x-axis, the labor productivity part, that we need to grow and shift them more to the left. Not every sector can employ labor, so not every sector would be up there, but at least let's move some sectors towards the right. And I think that's the key message we're trying to pass across.
So what the chart is the share of employment and the productivity, high productivity. So on this elite sector, ICT is a very, very high productive sector. Yes. So it's way on the right, but doesn't employ a lot of people. So it's sort of down. Yeah. Then we have agriculture, low productivity, because once I carry cutlass, I'm a farmer. But so I'm a farmer. There are lots of farmers like me in all local governments in Nigeria, but we have very, very low productivity. So we are stuck on the left-hand side. What is really curious to me is that there is no Nigerian sector in the efficiency champion, which is high productivity and high employment. There's none. So banking, manufacturing, whatever trade, ICT, there is no economy or no sector in Nigeria that employs a lot of people and is also productive. That's very, very depressing to think about, really.
Yeah.
Even the banks, even the banks.
Yeah, Carlo, is the story of Nigeria's development, to be honest. And so when I looked at this for some of the Asian countries, you would notice that even their finance industry is has some of the highest productivity levels, and employs maybe not so much people, but at least is more to the right. And in fact, what you see as the efficiency champions are sectors like manufacturing. In fact, in Singapore and co, those that sector employs close to like 20%, 15% of the workforce. And that's the industrialization we're talking about, whether it's even in China and the likes. So, and their productivity is very high because we're not just talking about basic food manufacturing, we're talking about, very smart, high level manufacturing. So you find some of these sectors, even healthcare and some of those sectors, you find them maybe not directly within or not in the efficiency quadrant, but somewhere close to that. In some cases, you would find them in that quadrant. So for me, it just tells you that we need to expand the depth of our private sector. We need to expand our businesses. We need to grow more businesses. How many large manufacturing firms do we have in Nigeria? I mean, the fact that you can count them tells you that, look, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to expand these businesses. Same with healthcare. I was having a conversation with someone and we're talking about in Abuja, they were looking for, an MRI machine, to scan. And in fact, what they said, they had gone to so many places. The modern, sophisticated machine is very difficult to find. But they said it was only one place they found it. And I was just wondering, and the queue is so long, I was just wondering, so where is the private sector in healthcare?
But how much an MRI machine? An MRI machine is not cheap, but how much is it? Is it up to $1 million?
Yes. So that's it.
And I know there was a guy on Twitter, I think it was a few years ago, that basically said a university in America gave him equipment for free because going to bring it to Nigeria and install it in Nigeria. And the Nigerian port service held the machines. And he brought letters from the embassy and said this is a charity. It's not going to go for whatever, for private sector and all that. And they didn't release the machines. He had to come on Twitter and scream. I don't know if he actually got the material, but how much an MIR machine that you can go to Abuja, the capital of the richest nation in West Africa, the fourth generation in Africa? Why do you have to queue for an MRI machine in Abuja? Maybe in my state you queue, but why in Abuja or even in Lagos do you have to queue? I had an MRI the other day. You go there and take. Why is it so difficult to get this or defibrillator? I've never seen a defibrillator in Lagos before or in Abuja. Never seen anyone. People are drop dead and die. Young people. I've never seen one that you can break a glass and get a defibrillator. That stuff is $200 for a defibrillator.
Yeah.
So
I think probably I think it's part of why I was, raising the alarm that we need to expand the private sector. And we're talking about investment. Was Nigeria's real investment to GDP still below 20%? So I don't think we're across all the sectors. Our banks can be bigger, our hospitals can be bigger, our professional service firms can be bigger, our mining can be bigger. We're still doing 1.5 million barrels per day in crude oil production. We can expand that, so it's a problem across board investment.
So, I mean, if you go to manufacturing, let's say finance needs, quote unquote, maybe skills. Manufacturing, Nigeria has got a low labor advantage. We have maybe, low labor advantage, and we have a huge market here. You would think manufacturing would take up a lot of slack, i.e., the Chinese would come in and establish a mega factory to process low value output. Maybe things that can no longer produce in China, like to make rubber slippers. It will be too expensive to make in China or Vietnam or wherever. It's too expensive. Just because no value out. Like a T-shirt, it's too expensive to make a T-shirt in China today. But on your chart, manufacturing employs very, very low folks in Nigeria and very, very low productivity. I will do manufacturing with generator and all that. It's a problem I see here, and that's what, if this links back to the why Nigeria is not growing, why we hear the 4.6, 4.7 GDP is this, but we don't feel the impact. It's really down to numbers like this.
Yeah, I think you're right. For manufacturing in particular, so when because I worked on this a lot more extensively, and when you look at what's in manufacturing, there is this argument that people always make, manufacturing was the main sector that drove growth in some of the East Asian countries, China and the likes. But I think we need to pay attention to what's in manufacturing. It's not just manufacturing now. So when I looked into Nigeria's manufacturing using data from Milan, NBS, and the likes, what you find is 73% of Nigerian manufacturers or of people working in this sector are self-employed. So it just means that the kind of manufacturing we're talking about is one man business kind of manufacturing outfit where somebody just making one small shoe by the roadside or just doing something. And then that sparked some curiosity, and I said, look, let me even look deeper, and you'd find that I call them subsistence manufacturing. Over 90% of Nigerian firms are subsistence in nature. By subsistence, I mean very low productivity, sole proprietorship type manufacturing outfits. They're struggling. They're very under-resourced. No capital. They employ very few people. They are very constrained within their domestic environment. Those people, like, you just make egg roll and buns and meat pie within you're just servicing your local market. So that's not the kind of manufacturing that can shift, that can drive development. So that's not the kind of manufacturing that can lead people out of poverty. So what I argued, and this is from my PhD thesis, is that the manufacturing in its current form cannot change Nigeria. So there has to be a transition within manufacturing itself. We're looking at transitioning firms from small to medium to large, and it has to be very deliberate. So industrial policy, how government supports these firms, is very, very important. So so that's for manufacturing.
Okay, let me get a few guys that want to speak. They've been putting their hands up. Let's get Winnie. Winnie, thanks for joining the conversation. We're talking Nigeria's macroeconomic picture, productivity and job creation in focus. Yeah, with Doctor here. Dr. Winnie, what made you come up? Talk to us.
Yes, my network is bad. I didn't clearly hear you. So just in case you don't hear me well or I'm not clear, you can please drop me.
I can hear you.
So I joined the All right, thank you. Greetings, everyone. I joined the conversation late, but I just came in to chip in on, I think, when people branch to MRI health.
Yeah.
I think the MRI machine stuff, from what I've heard, some of these machines are run such that you shouldn't have a break-in power supply.
Oh.
So, there's this engineer here. He comes to your space. His name is Ichie, I think, if I'm not wrong. And he's into solar. He advertises, So I know in the recent past, he put stress on how they had to go and install that for someone. I think, I can't remember where specifically, but you could hear him say, I didn't know these machines had to run like this. So I know that that's one of the challenges. It's not necessarily that even if the government can't afford it in their own facilities, the challenge for private people is the electricity. And since we're talking about the microeconomic, I don't know, of recent, since this distribution company, especially in this administration, I'm not targeting anybody politically, power supply has been terrible. I live in Kaduna. It has been very, very bad. You know, from one excuse to the other, vandals, and then wind, and I think there are news that transmission towers are collapsing. Where these things not happening in the past, you know, and when they came, they said, oh, even if we give you power, you can't afford it. Then they put people in bands, band A, band B, band C, and eventually we are not able to see the power. We don't know what the distribution companies are saying or are doing. And if you've noticed recently, you find out that universities, teaching hospitals are crying. I know Aminu Kano in I don't know, the Kano Teaching Hospital, AKTH. I know that, you know, you could see, I've seen some tertiary institutions complain about the fact that teaching hospitals, that they need to cut power supplies because of how, or they complain about how exorbitant their fees are. So I think that's what it's not just one issue. It's, I think one thing affects it, and power is doing a major thing, you know, with this market, and then the technological know-how too, you know, even though maybe when we see in the movies and what they seem simple to use, and then some of those things they are so sensitive. Like, I know about the pulse oximeter, you know, you should handle with care. The engineers are few. So sometimes we even have that NGOs or donate these things to us, but when they get bad, or when something as simple as the cord has a problem, you don't know where to fix it. You don't have who to fix it, or it's outrageously expensive. So I think it's just I don't know. It's just a lot. But I want to focus on power with this MRI thing. Because you see that private people can't do it, and I don't think they are not interested in the business. It's just that it's beyond them.
I would suppose that, like, you know, before we had that national hospital, that was built by Mariam Abacha. You know, there was no world-class hospital in Abuja. So she built a world-class hospital. Even if it's the national hospital, they have an MRI in the national hospital. That's just the question. So that's our, you know, highbrow public hospital. So they should have an MRI that works. And I think your quote about power is completely on point. The doc, I'm not sure. Do you have any feedback on what you said?
No, I think she made very valid points, and it was part of the. I think we listed a couple of problems. If you go later in the slide as to why some of these things are not happening: power, finance, you know, skills, and co. And I think that point you made about skills is so important, because when we were speaking to private firms, you know, in putting together this report, that was one of the biggest problems many of them said they face. You know, skills. What are the skills development trainings that is going on across the country, and how do they align with the needs of the private sector? Are we just training people, you know, and at the end of the day, they can't really, you know, contribute significantly to their companies? Just imagine with the Dangote refinery, where he had to get engineers from all over the world, you know, to come in, even as things like welding, for instance. You know, the welders we have, many of them could not even pass the competency test. You know, they were seeing tools that they've never seen before. And they're wondering that welding is not just about, you know, carrying your small machine, and, you know, these things are very sophisticated. But what's the quality of training programs we have to be able to train welders of the future? You know, I think when one of the people we interviewed, she was telling us about how the government would even import tractors in one of the states. And then they had tractors. When they go bad, it's difficult to find engineers to fix them. So even with the mechanization of agriculture that we're talking about, how are we training people with the right skills so that when these machines go bad, they can fix them? And what you find is that you just see these tractors parked somewhere. You know, nobody uses them anymore, just because there's not enough people don't have the skills to fix them. So I think that's a very important point that you raised, William.
Doctor, before I take my next guest, I want to speak. I just want to point out the tractors were brought from Belarus. We brought them in. The president has inaugurated them. They are parked. They haven't been distributed. I posted on Twitter a few days ago. I checked again. They still haven't been distributed. So why bring them from Belarus? They are still parked. Maybe they want to use them for elections. But we have the farmers waiting for them. Distribute them. Let the farmers start to use them. Just putting that out there, Doc, just to compound, just to emphasize what you said. So we've got the Duke of Agba. Duke, you've got the floor. We're talking economy, productivity, and job creation. Go for it, sir, Duke.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, sir. How are you doing, sir?
We're doing well. Go ahead.
This is my first time to speak in your space. I've been following your post, and in fact, you are doing more in educating Nigeria, especially in the finance aspect. You are doing great. Thank you.
Thank you.
An issue I want to, the lady that spoke earlier on, I happen to be in the same state with our Kaduna State, per se. When you look at economy, we are talking about economy. I don't think there's any economy that can work effectively without power. Power is very challenging here in Kaduna for more than a month now. But I don't think we can count how many hours we have seen light. Now you talk about these MRI machines. So some of these machines supposed to be on almost 24 hours, and the power is supposed to be there. I know that in Kaduna here, Army Reference Hospital machine, because I've been there about 2020. This thing in our capital, federal capital, not having it, I think it's. And also, how good.
Duke, your audio is going in and out.
Okay, maybe it's network.
Yeah, I apologize. If you want to round it up very quick, cut off the audio quality.
Okay, it's okay. So I don't think for our economy to be great, to grow. I think that we should power, energy. We should be our number one thing. How can Nigeria have at least 20 hours of electricity? We are not talking about 24 hours now. 18 to 20 hours. If we are going to have it, then a lot of things will fall place. Many people jobs will be created. At least the little minor jobs, like a welder who is on the street doing his work and other things. And I think we should power should be number one thing. Thank you so much, sir.
Appreciate that, sir. Dr. Wilson, just the last slide before we hand over to the floor, because we have a lot of people want to speak. The last slide is on the skill. You mentioned the skills. You mentioned the skills that are needed by the private sector. I had a slide that you shared, shocking slide. It's talking about share of children ages 4 to 6. This is a percentage of children that can name 10 letters. Only 45 children in Nigeria can name 10 letters. Only 31 children in Nigeria aged 4 to 6 can read simple words. Only 38 Nigerian children aged 4 to 6 can write at least 3 letters. Only 39% of Nigerian kids aged 4 to 6 know that one digit number is larger than another one digit number. That's sobering, Dr. Wilson. That's very sobering. If we have kids that don't understand how to write 3 letters, this is the next labor force, right? So what are we talking about here? Hello, Doc.
Please confirm if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, I can hardly hear. Maybe because the call came in.
Okay.
But I think what the data shows on the education slide, I guess that's where you are.
Yes, I'm on the education slide. They were talking about the number of Nigerian kids that can read and write. Some very, very bad figures here. I said only 31. You can't hear me?
This I can hear you. I think this slide is one of the most depressing slide, and this is from the NBA. So we don't want a case where people are asking where do you get your data from. This is from the General Household Survey. It was published in 2024. I don't think many Nigerians have seen that report, and I was supposed to send it to you as well. It just shows healthcare outcomes, education outcomes, and there are also numbers on food security and food insecurity. And in fact, it just tells you that what we have, a learning crisis is unfolding. if we have these numbers, that less than half of children that are aged 4 to 6 years, can just name at least 10 letters. At least 10 letters, and then just very few can read 4 simple words. Very few can write 3 letters. So it just begs the question as to what are our kids learning in our schools? What's the quality of teaching? What's the quality of the facilities that we have in these schools? Mind you, we have, over close to 15 million, or if not more than that, that are out of school. And we're saying just there are those who are out of school, there are those who are within the school environment, but they are not learning as they should. And one challenging thing about this is, if you don't get it at this level, if you miss it at this level, especially in terms of literacy and numeracy, where only very few people can count 1 to 10, how are you thinking of creating the next engineers, the next tech experts, the next doctors, the next scientists, in decades to come? So I think, for me, I don't know, many people have said we should create a state of emergency as far as education is concerned in Nigeria. Because look at the budgetary allocation to education, look at the quality of spending allocated to the sector. So this is one sector, education and health, that I think, for whatever reason, Nigeria should not compromise, the quality that goes on, the value of the sector and what is allocated to those sectors, because they are so important. It's almost like they are the bedrock or the foundation of development. We're talking about skills, we're talking about a more productive workforce. This is where it all starts. And if we can't get it right at the basic, primary level, then I think there's a lot more that we should be worried about.
All right, perfect. Let me get I just want to make sure I have him here. I think he's dropped off. I had a colleague of yours that wanted to hop in, but I think he has dropped off. Let me get
McDonald.
Yeah, I did add him. I think he dropped off. Yeah, let's get Solomon Friday. Solomon, you've got the floor. Solomon, please go ahead.
Good evening, Carlo. Good evening, Dr. Wilson. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for the opportunity. So I'll just go straight to my point. Okay, yes. So I've been going through the slides that has been shared. I kind of have a reservation on the slides because of the data. I think for me personally, I always have a problem with the data source for Nigeria, because I feel most of these data are not reliable. For instance, when we're looking at the percentage of wage earners in private and public sectors, I'm looking at this data and I'm very particular. Yes, it could be understandable for Borno State, considering the influx of NGOs and other things. But coming to look at Akwa Ibom before you look at a state like Ogun State or Rivers coming before them. Personally, since I'm from Akwa Ibom, I know the kind of comparing Rivers State to Akwa Ibom. I think I don't think that.
Are you saying it should be more or less? Just clarify for us. Are you saying it should be more?
I think that Rivers should actually come more first before Akwa Ibom, considering private sector investment. So seeing that this is reflecting here, I kind of have a lot of reservation about the data. Now, for health, it's quite a huge concern because I'm very, very familiar about that terrain with the level of investment, especially with the influx of aid in recent times coming into Nigeria. Then I listened to Winnie's point about the MRI. I think power should not be an issue, considering that it is in the north. Yes, because I recently read something about Nigeria beginning to export solar panels to Ghana. So I'm wondering, with the amount of with the amount of sunlight and every other thing, that the north should be taken care of in that aspect of generating their own power. But I have a problem with governors because, like, for instance, recently I had a relative that was sick, and I discovered that in the whole of Akwa Ibom, there were only 2 CT scanners. For instance, the former governor took the only CT scan that should have been in the teaching hospital. He took it to his own local government area, not even his local government, his own village. So when I look at some of this and I hear some of these comments, it's kind of heartbreaking, because when you consider the level of investment in health, especially from countries like the US into Nigeria, I think our health sector should be doing very, very well comparable to what we have currently. So it's quite alarming. I just wanted to put it out there. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, that number, that chart is like Doctor has said, is from the NDS. So I do Borno. Yeah, someone has sent me a DM that is mostly the NGOs and all that kind of stuff. That's fine, but the other states did that. I'm not sure because in Nigeria you always hear Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, i.e. Rivers. When we rolled out MTN, it was Lagos, Abuja, Rivers. So to see Ogun State, that is basically Agbara is literally their neighbors, and that most of the factories are there. But Ogun State is not showing up there in terms of job creation for private. And you have Borno, Kaduna, all the states well before Ogun State. I'm not sure how that might, but maybe they have their own numbers. Let me get Abdulaziz. Doc is back. Doc was off, but Abdulaziz Mohammed, you go ahead, sir. You've got the floor. Solomon, I appreciate your comments. Abdulaziz? Abdulaziz is having issues speaking. Let's get Ibuka Namani. Ibuka Namani, please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Mr. Kalu, I appreciate the opportunity to speak and have my own contribution this evening. This is actually a very sensitive topic. When I saw it, I actually got some reservation, but I said, let me say one or two. When we are talking about this macroeconomic picture on productivity and job creation, it is vast, and we sometimes when we're talking about it, we tend to not look into how countries like China has been able to defeat and become productive in the area of Nigeria. Regardless of data, there's data we have in Nigeria here. Regardless of the general data, the MBS data, sometimes they might be correct, but sometimes they might not be. But there are practical format or formation that China used to create jobs in their places. Sometimes Nigeria, we promote education too far than looking at how we can create jobs naturally. There was something, there's a data I was reading about China, and they said that from young age, you are not going to go into formal education first. You will learn culture, then learn apprenticeship, so that at a point, you can now start learning how to build personal, small things before you can become professional into that particular area. So from childhood, what they are modeling you to do is to learn how to produce and be productive to the economy. So most Nigerians, we focus on building education, reading in the English, don't focus on being productive. Like one of our speakers was actually pointing out that there are some machines that are imported in Nigeria here. When they import them, immediately they have issues, nobody to maintain them. Now, the people that will do this maintenance are the children that are coming up. But funny enough, most people push children to education, not training them on how to learn how to position or have the required skill for the next generation. So some of these things that are being produced, nobody to fix them. So we are bringing initiative without sustainability. So that's what is killing Nigerian government. We have a lot of initiative we're bringing up every day, but there's no sustainability. We're not training people to sustain the initiative. And if you're not training people to sustain the initiative, how can we create jobs? So that is a problem. The automobile sector is big, but we lack engineers. We lack professional engineers. We don't take engineers out to learn how they can be advanced in the current technology. Me and my friend was talking about Tesla cars. So they were saying that people are coming into the buy Tesla in Nigeria. Who will maintain those Tesla? If it has issue now, who will service them? Now, if Nigerian government were seeing ahead, we can start training our children to start learn how to maintain and repair electric cars. No, those are the futures. Sophisticated machineries. It will help create a futuristic job. Not just learning how to read and write. You might not read and write, but you are productive in the economy. So that's the area. Even if the government is not giving you everything, but there should be a base of how children should be trained, not just reading English and writing English. You might not be able to learn how to speak English or words, but you can produce and add value to the economy. That is what is productivity and job creation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Buka. Doc, he makes an interesting point. I think if I understand what he's saying, we are focused on the academics. The BScs, the MScs, all that. There was a book a long time ago that Lee Kyung-wan, the Singapore guy, the guy that made Singapore, he said he came to Nigeria and was talking, I think it was with Tafa Balewa or the Minister of Commerce back then. And then he said that the advisor to the Prime Minister was a guy that had masters in history. He was trying to make the point that, this is the guy that's advising the Nigerian government. This was way back in the 60s on economic development. Had a master's in history from, say, Princeton. Making the point that, we're really focused on the academics and not the getting our hands dirty like what the Chinese did. Chinese guys can uncouple, they're making their own engines now for their planes. But Nigerians have BSc in aeronautical engineering, but we can't make a plane. So I think I sort of agree with what Ibuka is saying. Do you have any? I know you guys in your presentation in any ages, you then move into your advice for the government or what the government should then do after you have listed this problem. Do you want to talk about that advice for the government, how the government could raise productivity and raise job creation in terms of boosting the local productivity of the capacity of the Nigerian workforce?
Yes, Carlo. I think the point that he made, I think he's looking at it from a different perspective. And he's even also diagnosing the problem itself. Because when you say we're focusing too much on reading, writing, and the academic part of it, you also need that. This skills development we're talking about. Look at the world today. We're talking about AI. We're talking about, cars that drive themselves. We're talking about, sophisticated equipment, planes, and the likes. You think those will come just by training alone? Some of them are, the knowledge that you have, the knowledge in engineering that you have. Why do you think China dominates so many industries? They've also invested heavily in their education. In some schools, in some countries, if you don't send your kids to school, it's a crime. So part of the problem that he is emphasizing is that the quality is because of the quality of our education has not, especially at the basic level. And part of what we see today is that many at times we've missed it at that basic level in terms of science and engineering. If we're talking about STEMs today, what does it take to build an engine for a plane, for instance? The knowledge that you need. Even for our manufacturers, Kalu, you see, let me take shoe for example. It's not just about making shoe and people wear it and go to work, or maybe look at the kind of shoes that Nike and the likes make for basketballers. You have to prioritize comfort, design, grip, so many things, so many science. If you see the headquarters of Nike, for instance, you would marvel and how did you build this place and the kind of investment in research that goes into this place. Some of it you would have people with sophisticated skills in different areas. That it's not just about learning; it's also about what the knowledge in the classroom that you gained over the years. So he's looking at the symptoms of the problem, but some of the root causes, it links back to education and perhaps also skills development. And what we did was to frame the two in a separate way and say, look, part of the problem is that many that are in school don't have the basic skills that will make them, be able to be productive in the next decade. That's one. And then the second part of it is then the skills problem itself. That, you have a case where there are so many trainings going on, and in some cases, how do those trainings align with the needs of the private sector? You get a painter, for instance, or a plumber, and then you keep calling them 10 times to just fix just a single pipe. painter wants to paint, and then they paint your door. And to them, it's normal, but to you, this is not how it should be done. There should be standards, there should be best practice that you adhere to. So, in a way, both are very much linked to each other. We can't say let's ignore education and focus on skills development, or we can't say let's ignore skills development and just focus on education. I think they have to go both ways, and it's part of the recommendation that we put forward to the government. In fact, one of the things we called for in the report is how do we get a national skills development program that identifies different trades and specifically train people in that area, aligning with the private sector. For instance, call some of the best engineering firms. We need engineers. How do we redesign our curriculum in some of these institutes to be able to ensure that we're training engineers that meet the needs of the private sector, not just training engineers? We look at the 3MTT program, for instance, the one that the Minister of Communications and Digital Economy is doing. Very interesting initiative. But how are we sure that when we train these individuals, they won't leave the country because they don't have the companies and the private sector to accommodate those skills? They don't have the opportunity to deploy those skills. Not everyone will be entrepreneurs, at the end of the day. So training and skills development programs has to align with, the growing capacity of the private sector. And I think that's one of the key recommendations that we've put forward. And we think that, there's a part of the informal economy also that was, discussed earlier. We highlighted that in the report, that anytime you hear about informal economy, what always comes to mind is how do we make them formal? So you see somebody, selling on the roadside. The next thing is how do we bring them into the tax net? How do we make them pay taxes? How do we make them register with CAC? And that has always shaped the narrative of how we view the informal sector or informal economy. But what we're saying now is all of those things are good, but they focus a lot more on what the people should give the government. It's almost like the government wants to just take. And the question is, what is government giving back to these people? And so that's why you will see that quote that development is not just about what people give to the government. It's also what government gives to these people. Where is the finance for them? Some of them, they need spaces. They need, places to sell their goods. Where is the finance for them? And not just finance, affordable finance for them? Where are the markets, affordable markets for them? Have you thought of that we need to create this environment for them to be able to live in comfortably? Where are the issues of the training program for them? How to start a business, how to run a business, how do you even scale? Going beyond that hustling and survival mode into, actually running a business to grow and scale. And then more importantly are some of the issues we've talked about: infrastructure, power supply, and the likes. So that's, I think that's one area that we also looked at, that we need to change that narrative, because anytime a new government comes in, whether at the state level or even federal level, the next thing is to let's bring them into the tax net. And by the way, many of these guys pay taxes. They pay levies, maybe not formal taxes to the government, but they pay levies to non-state actors. Some of those guys hawking, if you know that the area where they hawk at, where they sell their product, they pay to somebody, especially if you live in Lagos. Right, so some of these shops, they pay these monies, to non-state actors. It's almost like, and some of these guys come, on in the name of local governments and say they are. So it's almost like government are giving these non-state actors authority to collect these monies. So the question then is, what are they getting in return? For that. Yeah, and I think that's also very, very, very important part of what we presented at the summit.
Gotcha. Let's get McDonald in here. Thanks to McDonald for holding on. Go ahead, McDonald.
Hey, good evening, Carlo. Good evening, Wilson. Thanks for holding the fort as usual and, dimensioning all of these complex issues I am Wilson's colleague, friend for a couple of years. We're both economists, and we've sort of like intersected. Our work has intersected at various on various platforms at diaspora. And when it pertains to this discourse on productivity, very recently, it was not just Wilson's presentation at the recent summit that spotlighted the issue specifically. It was also the fact that my company, the company I work for, which is Flour Mills of Nigeria FMN, we are one of the NESG sponsors, and so we're one of the sponsors of the summit, and we hosted a very specific breakfast session the day after day 2 of the summit, where we sought to spotlight how to set a national productivity growth agenda, right? And for us, the context was, okay, we've had these reforms. I know that there's a lot of contention as to what the impact of the macro agenda under the current administration has been. But I suppose that the mainstream consensus would be, well, we're arriving at a point of macro stability. And so if we are going to do two things, one is accelerate growth, just to accentuate Wilson's earlier points about having to move from 2, 3, 4% growth to 7 to 10, and do it in a way where inflation is not the principal contributor to that growth, especially given where we're coming from, a high inflation environment that we want to bring down. That productivity is the key. It's the way to do it where you raise growth and then still do it without spiking prices or compounding the inflation problem or keeping inflation high, as it were, given the context where we are. So the presentation Wilson made on day 1 of the summit, I think, and it's been extensively discussed by him in the course of this space. I think it's very elaborate by itself, but what we want to be able to do at this point is, okay, given this context, given this backdrop, given the multidimensional nature of these issues, what are the key imperatives of setting a productivity agenda going forward? We've had one plan period, a development plan period from 2021 to 25. It's lapsed. We've largely not met the targets. And then we're moving into another plan period between 26 and 30. And then there's all of these growth targets for where our GDP would be, and et cetera. So I think that there were 5 questions very specifically that we sought to answer at our session in the course of this. And I'm just going to run through them quickly. The first is, have we defined what productivity means and are we measuring it? Do we even have productivity metrics that we track as a country? At what level? How regularly do we measure it? What's their frequency? Do those productivity metrics line up to global convention? How does Nigeria stack up? And can we fill in the gaps vis-a-vis between what we are doing now and what we don't measure, or what we measure and whether we do it well enough, what we don't measure and whether we can begin to do it, and can we create a national dashboard, as it were, of productivity? And I think that particular question, and this session at least was organized around discussion roundtables. Wilson actually led one of them, which I'll come to shortly. But that particular conversation around what we're measuring sort of like gave rise to 2 or 3 very specific recommendations. One is that we need to grasp and understand how to systematically measure total factor productivity. Mr. Kando, I've been on several of your spaces in the past, and often you bring up Bismarck Rwane's presentations at the business school or elsewhere in his monthly sort of outlook catch-up to the business community. And occasionally he spotlights this total factor productivity indicator. But it happens sporadically. There's not a lot of insight into what the underlying methodology behind it is. And I am not questioning whether those methodologies are credible or not. But the key point, I think the key underlying point is that is not the central focus of a lot of people when we think about the macro indicators that we track. And it also doesn't help that there's not a lot of consistency in bringing that metric up. So we track how we actually doing over the long term, over a consistent period, month to month, quarter to quarter, whatever the measure is on an annual basis. How are we evolving, as it were, on this metric front? So, and where are the national authorities, the national statistical authorities in measuring or keeping track of this indicator? And then beyond that, you then need to move into sectors specifically. What are the sectors? What are the productivity indicators at the sectoral level? There's been a lot of conversation here today around Wilson's four quadrant slide, right?
McDonald, just want to make sure we'll round it up, yeah?
Yeah, I'll get that very quickly. So there's been a lot of conversation around Wilson's four quadrant slide and lack of efficiency champions, etc. What are the major sectors that are employment intensive, agriculture, manufacturing, etc.? What are the sectors that have strong knock-on effects, such as telecoms, that may create productivity impacts or stimulus to the other sectors? What are the kinds of indicators that they are particular about? So what are the investments we need to make in order to drive productivity growth, right? We've seen a lot of talk around the dislocations in the way we think about our human capital resources. What are we planning for? What are we, are we boosting the quality of education? Are we directed the investments and capital? So just so that I don't bore you, because the session itself is extensive, what we are trying to do is, as a corporate and a large corporate with a lot of manufacturing concerns, but also one that's involved upstream in the agriculture industrial nexus, we believe that setting a productivity agenda has to, we're looking to combine these baseline conditions that the NESG's report has outlined and to fuse that with answers to these very specific questions. I do not want to be too extensive in speaking to all of the very specific recommendations that our discussants brought up at that session. But what we're looking to do over the next 2 months, working with the NESG, is to combine these insights into a very specific national productivity agenda that would highlight the indicators or highlight the specific gaps we have in measuring productivity, the investments that we need to make to drive productivity, and the kinds of policy changes that we also need to adopt and be mindful of if we want to make productivity the focus of our agenda going forward. And also hopefully to fuse that into the national development plan that would succeed the current one that's lapsed without a lot of success. And so it's not just, and my point in bringing all of this up is that it's not just about making recommendations to government too. It's also about getting key private sector players to be particular about this. I do not want to go again into some of the particular things that my company does. For instance, our focus on yield transformation in the agricultural sector, which is the productivity metric, our focus on post-harvest losses, which is the productivity metric, and how that can support manufacturing capacity utilization which is a manufacturing productivity metric for companies like ours that harness local agricultural raw materials. So, but I think in order to move this conversation forward as a country, let's a coalition of industry players with think tanks like the NESG and then potentially the government define an agenda. Okay. And that's what we started doing in that conversation at the summit, building upon the work that people like Wilson and the NESG have already done. There's a lot more I wanted to touch on, but of course I'm mindful that I don't want to dominate the conversation and that we are time bound. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, McDonald. I think just to be clear, if you want to measure if your country is doing well, let's use that balance. Is the country doing well? You measure productivity. It's that simple. Is the country doing well? You don't want to measure GDP or exchange rate. You just measure productivity. So it's very important what we're talking about. That if Nigeria is doing well, what's productivity? You do more with less. Very simple. Do more with less. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Let me get. Gotcha. So Abdulaziz Mohammed, you've got the floor. Thanks, Mohammed McDonald. Abdulaziz, hi, welcome back. Hope you can speak now. Abdulaziz? Right, let's get Prince Dr. Enna Orobo. How you doing, sir?
John 1-5.
By Janet and darkness cannot comprehend. Thanks, Carlo. I think the total factor productivity, or what you will call it, multi-factor productivity, is tricky. We cannot just put metrics and say we want to drive up our total factor productivity. What do I mean? Let's look at currency, for example, which is fluid, which online real-time changes. China plug in to be an export economy. They don't mind if their currency is weak, but the US is fixated with making currency strong. And if you look at agricultural sector, for example, so I think the bedrock is we need to define our economy on one leg. Two, we need to know what we are competing against. And this is the third question, because Nigeria is not in isolation when you talk of the macroeconomics, based on if you look at the impact of the tariffs. And on the long run, what do we want to benchmark our country against? Is it OPEC? Is it MINT? Is it OECD? And why do I say this? For China, agri. For India, agri is more than first food security. It's about absorbing the crowd that is unemployed, because it's a national security risk to leave that population in the streets. 22% of the Chinese, 170 million people, are absorbed in the agricultural sector. Now, what did China do? China specifically stifled technological dynamism in the agri sector so that as a national security strategy, they absorb more people. China shares similar topographical and climatic conditions with South Korea. But South Korea farmers are 80% more effective than China. If you go to India, India employs 250 million people, which is 46%. So total factor productivity in isolation might not be enough. It's about what direction are you trying to define. And what do I mean? We need to define our economy. When I think of India, I think of IT talent. When I think of the US, I think of aviation, Boeing, and technology. When I think of Ukraine, I'm thinking of weaponry. When I think of China, I'm thinking of maybe space technology. What is our economy? Because we cannot compete on all grounds. You can't go send a space to satellite. The next me want to compete in agri. The next me want to compete in oil. And even the oil and gas that we belong to OPEC as a cabal. Brother Kalu, between 2010 and 2015, OECD countries, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they made more money from crude oil than OPEC countries made. So there must be a balance. We must define what are we doing. It's not enough to bring tractors from Belarus. Do we need tractors? Maybe not. If the country wants to employ, because agriculture sector employs the most people. Another sector that employs a lot of people is water tourism. In the US, for example, 2.5 million people, generating about $66 billion in annual wages. So we must scan the economy and look, okay, which sector would employ more? Which sector will employ less? But what are we driving out? Who are we competing against? What do we want to achieve? Let's go to the agri sector. That's Adewumi Adesina, the former agri sector, did. When he was Minister of Agri, he increased the lending to the agri sector as a function of general banking lending. For the macroeconomics, it's about where the money is going. Follow the money. Dangote spent 20 billion. See the impact on our oil and gas sector. So if, as a government, the government has not looked and said, okay, this sector has the opportunity to gain the most, to employ the most people. This sector has the opportunity to generate the most, to make the most profit. The government will now will now align that and decide what they want to do. Do they want to make more money and put people on welfare? Or do they want to employ more people and reduce productivity at that level? That's how you run it. And we must go further. When you talk of education, you can't touch education. Never underplay theoretical education. Patents per capita is a function of how a country will function. The 10 most valued companies in the world, the Amazons and the Microsoft, they spend 10% of their revenues in R&D, not even education. It's about R&D. And if investment into R&D is not upped as a function of output, then there's no way you are pushing further. And let's even hinge on agriculture. And I'll come to what we're even guilty of in this space. There's difference between data, information, and actionable intelligence. Yes, you've given us a good research. Yes, you've brought your statistics. I have a doctorate in engineering. I'm an infrastructural specialist. Now the government comes to you and says they want to build an airport and renovate the what's the name? The
MMA.
712 billion. That's data. As good as everything they've presented, what's his name, Dr. Wills? That's data. It's different from information. And it's different from actionable intelligence. And when I listen to a president, and when I listen to a minister, like I see the big back between Umahi and Makinde, All I hear is data. Okay, you spend 712 billion. What's my business? You now need to up it to information. Oh, 5,000 women will be employed. I'll give you an example, Carlo. The floral industry is what's in Colombia. The floral industry employs a lot of women. Now look at the country as okay, do I want to absorb women? What sector should I invest in? Flora. That's actionable. That's information. Based on the data and information, that's when you have the foreign direct investments to the heavy industries that you need because the money is overseas. You don't have $20 billion to build the Dangote refinery. You don't have $2 trillion to fund the electricity gap that you're talking about. But if you keep pushing out data, the investors, the money is waiting for you. There's so much money in the US. There's so much money in Qatar. Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund. There's so much money in the Canadian Pension Fund. There's so much money in the Norwegian Sovereign. They are looking for projects. And those projects are what will create jobs. What do I mean? The private sector, auto sector in the US, produces 11 million jobs. So if there's no investment in an automotive industry or heavy industries that the foreign direct investors will see, how would the jobs that you're thinking will create, the one that is a high absorber, how would they create it? And we can always have that narrative by even in these our discussions when the government, the ministers are speaking business savvy, showing that we understand the undercurrents. And we're not speaking in data. Not are we speaking information, we're speaking actionable intelligence. What do I mean? In conclusion, I was at the budget defense in 2014. Then coordinating minister of the economy, Okonjo-Iweala. She was speaking, Nigeria has created 8 million jobs during Jonathan. I'm like, good, beautiful, beautiful. She kept reiterating it as a talking point, reiterating it. And I raised up my hand. I said, Mom, you've told me how much jobs have been created. Have you told me how much jobs have been lost? That's the information. Because you've not aligned the lost data. Just like I come and say, foreign direct investment for diaspora remittance is 20 billion. How much has been laundered away from Nigeria?
Do we do net? If we say net, does that count, or it has to be two sides of it? If we lose agricultural jobs and get maybe service jobs, does that then tie into the objective of the economy, i.e. create jobs? Does that matter, or just go to the net?
It matters, but it has to sync with what the government has designed. So it's not about what we are seeing. It's about what the government has designed and then working through that design. Because that design is what will bring investors. Because if, for example, the heavy industry needs skilled people, and the government wants to invest in education to prepare for opportunities in the future. Let's look at energy, for example. Let's look at AI. The President Trump gathered all the billion-dollar tech people, and he sat down about a month ago. Elon Musk was not there. Now you thought they were discussing technology. They don't need to discuss technology. What did they say they're discussing? They were discussing energy. Because the 600 billion that Donald Trump is announcing that they will need to invest in AI, you need cooling for it. You need energy. AI is energy hungry. So the big question is, if we follow the data, Trump just comes and says $600 billion. That's data. And if he goes further and says this will create 300 million jobs, that's information. But if you now have actionable intelligence, which should be our talking point, which nobody speaks, well, we can go ahead and begin to prepare ourselves for energy. What do I mean? We have 132 trillion cubic feet of gas. My village was actually the largest gas plant in West Africa. Nigeria is actually a gas country. So actionable intelligence is, we'll be speaking in that line, trying to attract these most valued ICT companies to see how they can come and invest. Why don't we have data centers in Nigeria when we have the energy?
That's a good point. We have the gas, it's there. So maybe Dr. Wilson will help in. I think you said a lot.
Kalu, our talking points cannot be data or foreign diaspora remittance, 20 billion. How much was laundered out of the country, which is information? Based upon that, do not gather actionable intelligence. It's the actionable intelligence that prepares the investor's mind. Because the investor does not have time to be listening to your hocus pocus. He's just watching. And the moment you hit the chords that he wants, there's so much money. They love Africa for investment. Dangote is the window. Even if you don't want to do, present it to Dangote. They believe in him. $20 billion was invested. He's fighting all the way. They will pump it through him and will build an economy in the heavy industry. But government must define the direction. If not, it will just be currency up, currency down, no direction. We must decide what we want to do. China came out. The economy grew from 1978 to 2013 by 100% to what you call total factor productivity. That was their aim. But we can't run another man's race. We must tilt it to our reality, and we must never isolate Nigeria. We live in a global economy where the economy is networked, and we have bilateral agreements. We can't just jump. We need a big brother. Israel is the 51st state of the U.S. Nigeria needs a big brother. Thank you.
Maybe we should go to China. Doctor, he said a lot. A lot of nuggets in what he said, i.e., we have to have the plan and then walk back. So what's the strategy? What's the long-term vision for Nigeria economically? Then sort of walk back. And I think the same arguments are sort of made. Like, if we want to be an export-led economy, if we want to copy China or want to copy Japan, what do we want to do, right? Do we want to be a consumption-based economy? Then we walk back. So, any comments on that, sir?
Yeah, that's a lot of English. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Thank you. It's a lot. For us, I engage policymakers. I mean, I don't. This is your idea of actionable intelligence, blah blah blah, and all that. For me, data sometimes influences actions, especially if you're dealing with policymakers. Some of the insights that we're putting out there, right? It's not just data. I mean, a few weeks ago, I was presenting to the top multinational in Nigeria, which is one of the Nigerian breweries, right? Just showing the data alone, you can see where the market is. They can see where the opportunities are. I mean, the CEOs and some of the top, everyone was like, I mean, these are very useful insights. So it depends on the narrative. I don't get the actionable intelligence, blah, 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 and all of that. And sometimes, too, data influences policy, and especially the insights that you're able to get from the data. We're part of there's a lot of things going on with Nigeria developing, the next development plan. All of these things feed into that process to say, where should investment go? Where are the places or the sectors where if you invest, in these sectors, they would have more ripple effects on the economy, whether it's in terms of jobs, whether it's in terms of value creation and all of that. And McDonald, I think, did a very, very good job in trying to explain that, look, it's the businesses that will tell you where the pain points are. You can imagine what flour mills know about the manufacturing industry and the manufacturing value chain. So I think it's a process where it's continuous. Like, you provide insights, you provide data, you provide evidence, you engage governments. The government. Sometimes, do you think the government knows exactly what they want to do? Of course not. Many things are influenced by interests, different things. But we as independent think tanks, it's our job to look at the economy from this bird's eye view, do research, bring out areas where we think growth can happen, development can happen, productivity can happen, and have even more effect on other aspects of the economy. And basically, that's what we're doing, right? Sometimes it's not straightforward in the sense that you don't get the result that you want, but you have to keep trying and keep providing these insights. So we've talked about value chain creation on your space so many times, manufacturing, what do we export? Manufacturing is still 2% of Nigeria's export, which is very small. We've talked about, so many things that needs to be done across different areas. We've talked about areas where investments are needed in the economy. I mean, these are all data, and you bring out insights from the data. So to be honest, I don't know what's...
Okay, let me ask you a question. When the government is trying to set up an economic plan, I know you guys you're speaking to them. They are doing an economic plan, like McDonald has said. Who do they listen to? Because they have to listen to someone. So one reason why I believe listen to the private sector a lot. It was a military guy who used to listen to the private sector a lot. Even Abacha listened to the private sector a lot. The government of today, if they are bringing a new economic plan, who do they listen to? Is it going to listen to you guys, or do they have their own advisors we don't know of? Because he has his ministers. Does he listen to those ministers, and the minister listen to you? What's your thinking of this?
My thought is one thing to plan, and it's another thing to execute that plan. So, with Nigeria, we've always had, very interesting plans. You go back to whether it's Vision 2010, 2020, maybe the ERGP, if you like, and the last National Development Plan 2021 to 2025. So I think planning is important. I wouldn't come here to say it's not. But what happens when you present that document to, say, or when the minister presents that document to the president and then, to the FEC and whatever, and it's now a policy document of the government? That's one thing. From how do you then break down these plans into implementable parts of it, and who drives what? What are the interests that are coming into play? And I think that is where all of those issues about political economy, I think that's very important, and that's one area that many individuals are still struggling to understand, because somebody, you say you want to build a road and somebody comes and says it's not important, let's do a new road from maybe from Ikeja to Ibadan. That's not in the plan, but it's the government says they want to do it. How do you then align your interest along that line with the new agenda of the government? Even going down to the budget, what goes into the budget? Because I think for me that's even the most important document of every government, the budget itself. So there are questions as to, does your budget align with your national development plan? You know how development plan was done in a country like Indonesia? I've studied this, extensively. Like where you set, in fact, it starts with the vision, right? The vision is even more, is longer in terms of years. So you have like a 50-year vision. You want to be a middle-income country by maybe year 2050, or a high-income country. And then you break that vision into, say, 5 years or 10 years, depending on different horizon of interest. And you have a medium-term plan. That they don't stop there. They move, especially under General, is it the one that left in 1999 that stayed for almost 30 years. You move from that planning, this 5-year plan, you break it down into medium-term strategies, and everything goes into your budget. You look at the priority project that you can finance, the ones that you may not be able to finance, the one you need PPPs, the one you shift maybe to some other budget. So your planning, your visioning has to be aligned with your annual budget. And this is not just done at the federal level, you do it at the same state level, ensuring that regional budgets and regional policies are aligned with the country's overall vision. I think Ethiopia also had that, and I think it was this last few years they derailed because of the war and all that. So, but we always find that with Nigeria, there's always that gap between the plan itself and how does that feed into government spending priorities for the year, and how does that also feed into the policies that are being implemented to, that will affect businesses. So that's where the gap is. And sometimes it will take a lot of advocacy. Some of the work that is being done by budget, for instance, where you are reviewing the budget and you are raising questions that this is not what is in our plan. This is not aligned with our development plan. How do we fix that? The NESG is calling sessions, engaging government agencies and saying, look, we're not sure we're aligned. It's almost like this 2030 plan to achieve a $1 trillion economy, by 2030. One thing we did at the summit, and interestingly, it was McDonald's boss that made that presentation. That look, we're a $250 billion economy now. We want to achieve $1 trillion by 2030. We have a gap of $750 billion. How can we meet that gap? What are the sectors that will drive that growth? And what policies do we need to make to unlock these opportunities in those sectors? So I think that's where the real work is for Nigeria. I always say this, that I think we need like maybe 50 more budgets, maybe 50 more NESG, maybe even more genuine civil society organizations that will shine the torch on the budget and see how it connects to the people and aligns with whatever development plan we have. And this is just the federal government. Just imagine the states and local governments, states that are getting enough resources now. How do we know what they use the money for. And in fact, it's not just budget, because again, budgets are always different from the actual, at the end of the year. So I think reconciling all of these differences, budget versus actuals, budget actuals versus development plan and visioning, that's where Nigeria's problem is. But for us, we still have to do the work of identifying areas that the economy needs to shift to. If we must lift people out of poverty, we cannot do that with this current structure. And it's very clear. And you need evidence to say that. And you need also evidence to point to the areas that will be able to lift people out of poverty. 80% are working in sectors with low productivity. People are doing POS, petty trading, ride hailing, Okada, and all. Is that the kind of jobs that will lift people out of poverty? And we're saying the data is showing this. What insights can we get from it to move us to where we should be? I think that's the key focus, not all of these, actionable intelligence. What? I don't understand that.
All right, let's, I don't want to, how do I do this?
1 minute.
Yes.
Change is a five-step process. The first is denial. The next is delay. The third is discarding. The fourth is implementation, and the fifth is internalization. And Einstein said you cannot solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. Carlo, you asked the question, who do they listen to? They listen to the lenders, the multilateral agencies. You can hear from their talking point, oh, the World Bank said this, the World Bank said that. Then if I go to planning, Carlo, I would say we've not planned well. We've not aligned. What do I mean? Section 14, subsection 2B of Nigeria's 1999 Constitution says the security and the welfare of the people shall be the primary concern of government. The most important economic document in a government is the National Security Plan. Go read the National Security Plan of the US, Philippines, India, Russia. You would open your mouth and wonder. And there's been a misalignment. When I read the National Security Strategy of Nigeria, it has no economic footprint. And if you look at investment, he mentioned Ethiopia. If you look at the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, you knew the security risk of developing that project. Every economic strategy comes with security risk. So we must plan well. We've not planned well. We've not aligned as the Constitution envisages to the realities of our people, our borders, amongst all of us. We need to up our national security plan. When you look at that document and you marry it with that of the US or Russia, and you say, wow, we've set up an economic strategy that will bring us to par with what we really want. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Dr. B. Dr. Wilson, I have a question for you, but I'm going to let Dr. B speak. Dr. Wilson, I'm getting a comment on DM. Someone says, please, can you recommend a book or a resource I can go to sort of understand more about the topic? I sort of understand on a peripheral level, but I'm not an economist. If you could refer me to books or a place I go to just to read up and sort of be able to follow conversations like this. That's what someone asking on DM. So I'll give you time and I'll come back to that. Let me get Dr. B, or if you have the answer now, you can go ahead. Let's get Dr. B to speak and then, yeah. Dr. B, the floor.
Oh, thank you, Carlo. Very useful insight from Dr. Wilson. A lot have been unpacked today. I think for myself, what I'm thinking about is looking at the whole foundation of where the issues lie. I think I'm not an economist. I'm a medical doctor, but I think Nigeria has issues with capital. There's not enough capital coming to Nigeria. I think our budget is very, very low. There's not enough capital coming to Nigeria. Our tax is excessive. I don't think as our nation is, we should be having that level of tax. Also looking at the 30% tax that was implemented on capital gains, I think that is underlying a lot of the issues in Nigeria. We need a lot of capital to come into Nigeria. We need a lot of industries to develop. I hear the arguments about skills. I don't think there's any need for developing skills if there are no sectors to absorb those skills. We cannot be developing technicians in textile industry, for example, automobile, for example, if we don't have industries to absorb those people. So we need as much as possible to, there are a lot of capitals moving around. Everyone has said that, but I think a lot needs to be done in bringing capital into Nigeria. In terms of the quality of skills, I think that's relative. I've been with professionals from Nigeria, overseas. I mean, I've seen a couple of engineers, very good. I got this electrical engineer. He had an interview. In the interview, they had to stop the interview and just give him the job because of the quality of his skill. I've seen computer software engineers, very high tech. I think a lot of them, they went to university. The couple I know, they went to university, but on the side, they also got practical training on the side, apart from the theoretical, which made them stood out when they went to for interviews. They got very high paying job. So I do think the quality of skill is relative. Doctors excel very well in my field where I work. But I think a lot of funds needs to come to Nigeria. In terms of the time, I don't think we have enough time for that as a nation because I don't think our leaders understand the grand scheme of things. Also, I think my question to you guys will be, looking at Nigeria, looking at the macroeconomy in general, where the jobs are coming from. I don't think it will be coming from manufacturing, agriculture. I think the last NPS results, there was NPS data. I don't think agriculture was growing that much. So, yeah, that's everything from myself, really.
I didn't really get the question. It wasn't like a comment, right? Just to be clear, Doctor.
No, it's a question. My question is around where.
Can you answer it? Where do you think the job will be coming from? Yeah,
where would the job be coming from? I don't see agriculture from the last NPS. Agriculture, I think agriculture was not growing or was even stagnant.
No, where do you think it will be coming from?
Yeah.
Not where it will not come from. Where do you think the jobs will come from?
Are you throwing bad questions to myself?
I'm trying, but yes, I'm doing that.
I mean, ideally, I feel jobs should be coming from agriculture, high mechanized agriculture, those pathways of processing, high-end products from the agricultural products, exports. But the way Nigeria is structured, the way we are going about it, funding and the likes, I don't think that is coming out from. Also looking at the data from the NBS, I don't think there is much action coming from that end. So I'm not positive about that.
I agree with you 100%, and the reason why I said so is because what we said is, we created a case where we need to create 27 million jobs. So what we are doing is an ideal situation. It's almost like asking where should the jobs come from, and we're saying manufacturing should be part of it. And manufacturing, we're also including agro-processing, so it sits under manufacturing. Between agriculture and manufacturing, if you process something, you're manufacturing. So it's almost, especially we're talking of processed into finished goods. So I think what we did was to say where should the jobs come from, giving our target of 4.5 million jobs every year. But whether it will come from that area depends a lot on government policies and, like you said, finance. Where will the money go to and all that? But one thing is clear: if we continue on this trajectory and we just keep doing things the way we're doing them, we will keep having many of our people hustling. Many people will be, just hustling to survive, from now till 2030. And to be honest, we will not see poverty numbers improve if we continue with this current structure. So what I'm saying is, if manufacturing keeps growing at 2%, manufacturing export is still 2%, manufacturing share in employment or share in GDP is still single digits, there is no way that we can create better jobs. Same for professional services, construction, agriculture, and a couple of other sectors that we highlight. But I think you made a very important point about. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I thought you were done. I just wanted to say, just describe a scenario, since we're dealing with this dilemma of where the jobs will come from, right? And we're thinking in terms of large sectors like agriculture and manufacturing and whether or not they can absorb. So let me just, and since the broad theme is productivity, let me just sort of like structure one scenario, sort of like network a scenario for all of us to reflect on. So Nigeria produces 12 million metric tons of maize, give or take, right? And what does that break down into? 6 million hectares of land for maize cultivation. So you're getting something like an average yield of 2 tons per hectare. Now, set aside increasing hectarage. If you double the yield per hectare of maize production, you move from 12 million metric tons, give or take, to around 24 million metric tons. So you double output on that basis, right? If you combine domestic consumption of maize by Nigerian households with what's harnessed or off-taken by companies like mine and other major companies that process maize industrially, you're already in a deficit vis-a-vis the 12 million metric tons that we produce, because we're talking 13 or 14. However, if you double that today, that changes, that sort of like inverts the scenario, right? So you have a surplus in terms of primary production that then makes it easy for companies like mine to harness and offtake without getting into a death match or struggle with those who consume maize domestically in masara form, etc., right? So there's greater stability in terms of that raw material source, in terms of that supply chain stability that companies need if they're going to plan industrial expansion. So the millers are much more confident about capacity utilization and raising it because they're now confident about the stability of raw material offtake. By the way, what you have done in moving from 2 to 4 is effectively yield transformation, which by itself is a productivity metric. Mm-hmm. Now, if you expand that hypothetical and you move, say, from 6 million hectares to 8 against the backdrop of 4 tons per hectare, that's 32 million metric tons. And at that number, Nigeria can actually meet Africa's maize imports gap, in effect, right? And still have enough for us to process it in industrial production and all. And so, question is, if you are deriving these sorts of productivity gains, and you're doing it at key sectoral levels like that, and you're thinking about the network effects between sectors across value chains, such as the agro-industrial one, I'm sure there are many others, you can pass on the gains from sectors where productivity has historically been poor to other sectors that might actually do a better job of absorbing. In the first place, you can create more work in agri without necessarily raising its contribution to jobs in total, which is the point you were making earlier in this discourse. Secondly, because you have stabilized the growth path of capacity utilization, which is the productivity metric in manufacturing specifically, you then create the space for manufacturers and processing to take up more jobs. Let
me ask you a question, Michael.
It's going to be a simple question that one sector can do, but there are network effects between sectors. And if you are mindful, like developing the productivity metrics in each of those sectors, then you create a collective net effect that begins to at least address these massive jobs problem that we're looking at.
Just a quick question for both of you, right? So if we could create jobs from employing people, or we could create output from being more efficient, if you were the president, which would you go for? Creating more jobs to get output, or just increasing the output without creating jobs? Which would be have a higher value addition?
Carlo, I think the answer to your question lies in what McDonald just mentioned now and the explanation he just gave. You know, he mentioned doubling yields.
That's
right?
That's why I'm asking the question, because he's saying doubling yields. So I'm saying, if we double those yields without, I heard him also say that's productivity, right?
No, he also mentioned moving from 6 to 8 hectares.
What about the job
Yes.
creation?
Now that's moving from 6 to, yes, exactly. That's the link I wanted to talk on and link that to job creation. That moving from 6 to 8, you need a combination of workers and machines. And mind you, this is just one product, right? We have the same problem with cassava, linking to industrial starch. We have the same problem with so many other products within the agricultural value chain. So, and that's where development happens. The moment you are able to tap into your manufacturing agro value chain and expand the all of the opportunities within and across the value chain, that's where the employment comes in. So when we say agriculture share declining in terms of employment, it's not necessarily that the number of people employed in agriculture reduces. No,
but
output, you could have a case.
But mechanized agriculture, I'm being devil's advocate here. Mechanized agriculture will reduce the number of humans that create that output, because you can double the output.
We had this debate when we were putting this report together. This thing you just said. Now, so how much of our lands are we cultivating at the moment?
Less than 40%.
Yeah, so there's no way you can
to scale hectareage in the first place, because you're not going to use one contrast from 6 to 8, right? So but what that does is that it expands the scope of how many workers you can bring into the farms, for starters. It's not necessary to increase the quantum in such a massive number, but you increase the number nonetheless. But you are also creating the value that you can then transmit downstream.
Okay, let me ask my question a different way. Does Nigeria
there's difference between volume dollar crop and value dollar crop. Tanzania has transferred a farm that was bringing maize, turned it to flour. They made 7% higher in revenue. So the answer to your question, as president, I will twist our economy away from volume dollar crop to value dollar crop.
What does that mean here?
Okay, let's use Flora for example. Colombia was dealing with cocaine issues, with coca being the primary product. What did they do? They now betted what you call the parallel industry. They now ported from volume dollar crop to value dollar crop, which is Flora. Today, Colombia is the largest exporter of flour, $2.3 billion in the flour sector, employing 200,000 direct and indirect jobs. And Bogota International Airport is now the most busy hub in that part of North America. So the answer to your question is, as president today, I will tilt Nigeria's economy from volume dollar crop to value dollar crop. That answers the question.
Okay.
And increasing revenue.
All right. Okay. Fantastic. What I was going to was that, and I appreciate that. I was just going to say, if I had to create jobs or if I had to reduce prices of food input, which would I choose? Because I was just kind of thinking, if we could chew gum and work at the same time, if they were mutually exclusive, or if we could achieve both at the same time, i.e., reduce number of the cost of goods.
I think we could, because then you get that yield transformation gives you some sort of stability in prices. It gives you some sort of stability in terms of the regularity of, Dr. Prince just said something about value dollar crops, which is actually interesting and needs to be explored. But I mean, you start with the fact that your volumes have improved in the first place, and so you're getting a much more balanced market dynamic in terms of where demand and supply is, and that kind of like smoothing prices over time. But of course, there are other things associated with it, because you need to be able to store off season, for instance.
Correct.
Yeah, these are the 33 million metric tons of grain that we produce. We have a storage capacity that's less than 1.5. That's a problem that needs to be solved, right? And that's an opportunity, by the way, if you think about it more broadly. So it's just like it's your chicken and egg thing, or potato, whichever you want to think about it. But it's not again, there's no mutual exclusivity. I think that's my point.
That's a good answer. All right, just want to educate myself. Okay, guys, time is really spent. We have 2 speakers left here on the space. We'll just take those 2 speakers, then go back to Dr. Wilson, just to sort of take us home. So I've got Abdulaziz. I've got like 3 times now. So Abdulaziz Mohammed, are you ready to speak, sir?
Okay, yes.
All right.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. You've got the floor, sir.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, and all the other speakers that have shared their thoughts. As for me, I think there's something very important here that we need to focus on. First, like the issue of electricity. Because looking at that quadrant data you shared, it was so insightful at the same time.
Abdulaziz, your audio is. I don't know if you can fix the audio a bit for us. It's we got lots of sound behind you.
Okay, can you hear me clear now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I said, looking at the quadrant data you shared, it was so insightful at the same time worrying. Because all those sectors, the performance of the sector as regards share of employment and productivity is very poor. So my worry here is on electricity, because electricity is central in all whatever it is we're discussing, talking about productivity, job creation. So I want to know if things that people that work at in NESD or think tanks like Mr. Wilson can please help in emphasizing more on electricity generation or investment in electricity, because if there's much investment in electricity, it has a multiplier effect. All the sectors, I believe their productivity would increase to a certain extent, as well as job creation would improve. So instead of providing solutions that are so much, so the emphasis should be on the basic things we need to get first, particularly electricity. Because if there's no electricity, it has effects across sector. It affects the public workers, it affects the private workers. As in, electricity is just too important when you talk of manufacturing, agriculture, and all that. So mine is like a plea to think tanks and those that have that the government listen to. Please, they should emphasize on this electricity. Like in Kaduna, for example, for the past 3 days, there's no light. So the MSMEs are affected. The big industries are also affected. So across the board. So if electricity is not fixed, there's no way we can even talk about productivity or job creation. So I think that's just my thoughts I want to share, and it's a plea to people like Mr. Wilson that work at NESD, if they can keep pushing and pushing on investment in electricity. Thank you.
Well, that's a simple one to listen, right?
I don't know what happened in Kaduna. Maybe you need to do a space on that.
No, I think a tower fell. I know I read a tower had fallen. I think it was sabotage. I know it was maybe blown up. I saw a tower fell. That's why they're having the main problem there in Kaduna. But that's what I read. So yeah. You didn't hear a tower fell. You didn't hear that a tower fell in Kaduna.
Well, we didn't get that information because there's a communication gap between the citizens, the people of Kaduna and KEDCO, because sometimes they are shy of disclosing this kind of information because they don't want that outcry from the public. So
yeah, I'm seeing it here on September the 20th. Kaduna Power Tower collapses. Vandals blamed. So the TCN reported that the power. What's it called? I'm going to share on space as well. September 20th, TCN reported that vandals caused the collapse of a power terminal to Kaduna. This was from NDD Imba, the SJM or Public Affairs. Yeah. Okay. So that's what's really that's the main thing.
Which day did you say?
September the 30th. Let me share it now on Twitter.
Well, I think this is a recent happening. Like 3 days back, since on Friday. You know, it's a recent happening. So the one you're reporting happened like long ago.
So yeah, well, maybe this is what's causing it. Maybe because they're not going to get power to you guys, so there's going to be a lot of they will push the power to you. It's not coming from Kaduna again and all that kind of stuff. I'm not a power guy, but I think this would have an impact because a long time ago this happened in Borno Axis, and they lost power for a very very long time because Boko Haram blew up the transmission tower. I think it's contributing. Not really. There's a power guy here. Maybe can explain to us better if he wants to speak out. So that's what I think. I'm not a power guy. All right, let's get the gentleman here. Where is he? Oh, he has gone off. He has gone off. Yeah. Okay, he's gone off. So I think that's the last. Yeah.
Please, can I say something
on the power issue?
No, not really on the power. It's just a general discussion.
Just very quick. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate whatever we discussed here, and this giving me a lot of light regarding what Mr. Wilson, Dr. Wilson said, and McDonald. But I believe that I've been in too many programs in this Nigeria. We believe in too many data, and execution is lacking in too many ways. That is why if you meet, what we're saying today, if you meet an average agricultural or person that plants for farms, you could get the real problem they are facing. Most of the time, when you see implementations are not followed up in Nigeria, I'm into real estate, and there's a lot of initiative that the government has provided. But when you enter the offices that are supposed to implement these things, nothing is happening. So Nigerians has these things already. They know that this thing is a problem. They have this data in their formation. But the problem is that we are not executing enough that would help us go from this microeconomic to productivity, which is not, we're not being practical. We're just fully on data. That's what I said before. What Dr. Wilson is saying is accurate. What we are saying, but we are focused. We're supposed to break it down to a daily, what we can solve that is solvable, be practical. We keep on making it bogus for government consumption or for big data processing. But for me personally, I'm a kind of one day-to-day practical person. That's what I'm saying. If we're doing this, let's advise how can we do it practically, not just on the data, big data basis. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Doctor, I think let me take you home with this question. Someone has asked a question. I want you to just maybe answer that question. Just take us home. He's asking, can we achieve the macroeconomic promises that we have here on this space without an investment in education and proper healthcare? So I know this was a part of also your presentation at the NESG, where you talked about your own plan, the NESG's plan or recommendations to the government, to sort of take us from where we are today to where we should be going forward. Probably you could talk around that plan, the investment that you guys are proposing to be in education, so we create the next generation of engineers that would then power the $1 trillion economy. Then from there, of course, that would also take us home as regards this topic of job creation and the economy. So you've got the floor, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Kalu. And I think before that, I just wanted to make a point earlier on that important question you raised about jobs versus prices versus GDP growth. Yeah. Which one should we prioritize? And in fact, it's an interesting topic that I think other countries are even trying to understand and navigate as to the role of technology. So if you look at the way manufacturing was in the 80s, it's not the same way it is now. There's a lot of tech going into manufacturing, and in fact, there are many people, so many scholars, policy experts that have said manufacturing is not does not have that capacity to create jobs as it used to in the past. And so countries should, because of course, the way technology is now, just think of what you need to make a car. I mean, much of it, you need sensors, you need so many things that you would naturally get in the services sector, rather than, having too many workers in the factory as we used to in the past. And in fact, in some countries, many of their factories are, robots, tech, and the like. So there's this debate in the West that it looks like services is the future. The future is no longer in manufacturing. And so whatever we do in manufacturing, we have to have that consideration in mind. But what's also very important, and I think I'm not sure if maybe Dr. Prince, I don't know if he mentioned this in a way, but one thing that is very important is labor-saving technologies in some of these sectors, that we're looking at. So when I spoke to a couple of medium, small-scale manufacturing, I was interested in this question as to, if we have all the technology in the world, are you going to employ people? Yes, productivity will increase, but will you still be able to employ people? And some of these guys said, number one, we can't have all the technologies in the world. We're worlds apart, in many indicators and many instances. Secondly, what we need. So one of the manufacturers gave me an example that they used to fetch water with from the well, and then it put in using in making whatever product. So they fetch water manually. Basically, they treat it and then they used to make whatever they're making. But what they did was to get some analog technology. I mean, they just installed and slurry pumps, that transfers that water quickly into the factory. And that process, the person fetching the water, the job role shifted a bit to managing the pumps. There were other roles created, and all of that. So what we're just saying is that there is not every technology that displaces workers. There are technologies that complement labor. In fact, some technologies you need workers, you need labor to handle that. And so when we're talking about manufacturing, productivity, job creation, I think that's one thing that the government has to bear in mind, that you don't have to go and install robots and say this is the future when you have millions of people unemployed. There are smarter ways and different ways we can balance out employment and productivity, just so we don't leave people behind, especially given the stage and level of development that we're at the moment, where our manufacturing sector is still very small, compared to some of the big giants that we're seeing. So I think that's investing a lot more in. Some of these firms just need analog technologies. They don't need sophisticated tools. They don't need AI and code. I think that they just need something that would improve their productivity. Making sure you just need some small machines that can make the process a bit more easier rather than doing this manually and using nails and heating and all of that. And I think those kinds of technologies are what a country like Nigeria can prioritize, invest in them. And then with time, people would, scale and develop competencies and move forward, because you can't jump from 0 to 100, because we're living in the world of technology, So I think that's one point I want to make. Then, I to be honest, I think education is way forward, because it's the roots of, some of the progress that we should have as a country, education and healthcare. And if you, like I said earlier, if you miss it at that basic level, it becomes difficult to catch up, and build careers in certain fields. Look at finance, for instance. You have to be very sound, knowledgeable for you to operate in that field. And this is not just about, whether it's technical or vocational. There's some areas, engineering, STEM in particular, you need your education system to be functional at the basic level, secondary level, tertiary level, for you to have the best of the best, operating in that area. So this is not me downplaying the impact of skills development or technical and vocational training. In fact, one of the things we argued in that report is that we need to, reform the entire technical, vocational, and training segment. All of the institutions that play a role, which is why I like the point that Abdulaziz made about skills and sectors. That how do we link skills with sectors that absorb this labor? So it's not just training people to be free job machinists when there are no companies to employ them. So that skills has to start from the demand side first, start from the company, rather than just looking at the supply side, which most times is always done, and it doesn't work. So start from the company. I see no reason why, for instance, the government should not engage players, call flour mills, Unilever, all of these large firms, call them to the table. What do you guys need? Not just in terms of skills, in terms of support, developing value chains. And in fact, that's one big job that we've taken at the NESG going forward, that we will facilitate that process between the government and these firms, and ensure that development is micro, down to the small businesses along the value chain. One of the things we're saying, there's a company processing cassava into industrial starch in Oyo State. Now, when I was making findings and speaking to people in the field, they're complaining about water because you need water in huge volumes to be able to do this, to run factories and process all of this. That's not something that the company, because it's not a big company, so it's not something they can absorb by themselves, the cost. So they need government intervention to say, how can we ensure that we help you provide access to water? Of course, you pay for it, but let's provide access to water. Because what you're doing is you're making that firm, you are growing the capacity of that firm to meet the demand of these large players, and they are able to expand and employ more people. And so that's basically what we're doing, speaking to the micro part of the work, that how can development be felt by smaller institutions and smaller companies. And in fact, what I say is that when we talk about industrial policy, the government is not structured to deal with micro problems. I'm sorry, I just looking at Nigeria. That's why you see when things are so micro, we struggle a lot. But when it's macro, it's easy for us to talk about exchange rate growth, inflation, and like. But when it has to do with how do small businesses grow, expand, scale, I think that's very tough for the government. And it's because they are not structured to do that work. Whereas if you go to countries like, we always mention China, Singapore, I've read a lot about Indonesia, and how they were able to grow firms. You see, when we talk about industrialization, it's so micro. So these guys will give a firm a loan, 10 million naira, say you want to produce, tissue paper, for instance, 10 million naira. That fund is measured, is tracked. If you produce more, the more your productivity increases, you can get more loans. If you pay back, you get more loans. So that process itself is rewarding firms that are being productive. The more you export, the more you get more loans. So you tie government incentives to expansion of the firm in terms of capacity and in terms of capability and productivity, as it were. But for us, we will just announce 100 million textile fund, and who knows who gets what, and everybody goes. But that's not the work. The real work of industrial policy and industrialization is following up to the micro and smallest, minute level at the firm level, and you reward success. Where your interventions do not work, you go back to the drawing board, stop some. Where there are firms that fail, you handle that process, and then you just keep thinking and rethinking of the next phase to do. And I think that's one of the biggest gap that I see. And for me, that's the reason why industrial policy has been. I feel like even if you give everybody power, if you give our firms power, not all our firms will be productive. This is not me saying power is not important, but I think there are some important things in addition to providing electricity that the government must do, and that's the hard work of industrial policy: monitoring, evaluation, access to affordable finance, and finance that make firms productive, they can grow and scale. And in summary, that's basically just expanding the depth and the breadth of the private sector. So I see everything as interlinked. We cannot say education is not important and then skills is important, or vice versa. So I think everything, and that's why we called for what we called for a jobs and productivity agenda that says, look, it's not just about doing micro. One ministry is doing this one is doing this, and then all of a sudden we don't know where we can't even track progress. But it has to be a coherent plan and agenda for us to move the country forward. And so that's basically the summary of what. And to be honest, if you read the report, you would see how micro we got, especially with the kind of people that we spoke to. I think this is just the time for us to move beyond, the macro. Yes, we're nearing macroeconomic stability, foreign exchange rates, growth, and all of that are, stabilizing. But this time we need to align job creation with growth. We need to move from, growth for growth's sake to growth that is driven by productivity. We need to, ensure that micro part of it, where businesses are expanding, people are working productively, wages are increasing. I think that's very important for our country.
All right, fantastic. Perfect. You said a lot, Dr. Wilson, and thank you. I think, in essence, just to bring it home, Nigeria needs to grow the economy, right? That's GDP. We talk GDP, the economy has got to expand, but we've got to create jobs. Why? I think because people have got to consume. Nigerians are not consuming anymore. The numbers on food consumption, on who buys a new car or generator or air conditioner anymore, no one. And if we don't consume, the economy cannot expand. The economy can grow because we're exporting more crude oil out, but if the farmers, the guys we've spoken about, do not generate enough revenue to send their kids to schools, to acquire skills, it becomes a very, very small economy, very, very circular economy, keeping just a few people. And out of the 200 million people in Nigeria, it becomes a very, very small market. So in effect, Nigeria becomes Rwanda by market size. We might have 200 million people, but we're then competing with an economy the size of Rwanda because they would have a larger consumption per capita than Nigeria. So we've got to grow the economy, we've got to grow incomes, we've got to grow consumption. That should then dovetail into allowing firms like the flour mills sell more flour. If they sell more flour, they make more money in the stock exchange. Pension funds can make more money. We reflate the economy, we reduce the deficit. It's all connected. It's all a circular economy, and that's why a topic like this is very, very important for Nigeria to understand the connection between productivity, job creation, and the economy. And that's what we're trying to do today with Dr. Wilson, and of course all the guys have basically commented during this space. So thank you, Doctor, for coming in here. Good. Thank you for the energy for also being that advocacy partner to the government and also giving the government ideas on how to implement most of these topics that we also talk about here. Well, here every weekend on Sunday, 7 p.m., we're always bringing up topics down to educate you. Like we said, we want to make you a better investor, better taxpayer, better citizen. And the only way you can know is to be a better person, to know what to engage with. It's not enough to just say, I don't like this, but what are you against, what are you for on the economy front? I think it's very, very important as a citizen. You understand how the economy works so you can know how to be a better citizen, to ask better questions, to basically hold the government more to account. That's our goal here, and I thank you all for making it possible by attending and also being a guest. Doctor, thank you so much, sir. When we call you again, please come back, and I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Carlo. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, sir. All right, folks, let me let you all go enjoy the rest of your weekend. I mean, there was going to be a dip by Monday. The President Trump had said China was restricting rare earth metals. The market had crashed completely. On my TL now, I see Trump saying no, he supports China's economy. I see over the weekend that VP Vance had called, they had settled a lot of issues. So, man, it's not going to be that exciting Monday anymore to buy the dip. So, sorry, guys. Sorry, folks. But Gaza is coming up. There's going to be a prisoner exchange. I hope that brings not just peace to the Middle East, but it sort of changes the narration and allows the economy to go back to normality. The US market is shut. The US government is shut down, but the economy is booming. That's a big, big data point. And maybe the US doesn't need the government, maybe, but if the government is shut and the economy is booming, that's just the market telling the government that we don't need you guys to perform. The government has to do better. US has to do better. China is building infrastructure. US is building fighter bombers, and they've got to really change how they spend the scarce revenues or tax revenue that they have to grow the economy. The world follows America. Whatever America does, we tend to follow. So if we spend more on weapons of war and not bread and butter, people also just say, well, America also does this, let's also do it. So just a few points out there. Thanks so much, guys. I'll see you all next week. You have a great day and take care of yourselves.